John Gotti, Mafia USA. Fear and horror. Poverty and destitution. Monster and predator. It will be about a big criminal. The name of this character: John Gotti. In the American imagination, John Gotti is the gangster who seemed to turn the mafia into primetime television, a man who walked into court like a celebrity and walked out like he was untouchable. He was not untouchable. He was a product of neighborhoods where reputation was currency, violence was leverage, and loyalty could be bought, broken, and repurchased with fear. This is the story of how a street kid from the Bronx learned to perform power, how he climbed inside the Gambino family, how he seized the throne in the most public way possible, and how that same hunger for attention helped build the case that ended him. It is also the story of the people around him, of the mentors who shaped him, the enemies who hunted him, the partners who profited with him, and the insiders who finally turned the lights on from the inside. John Gotti's life is often sold as swagger and style. But if you follow the chronology, the glamour drains out, and what's left is a long trail of intimidation, betrayal, ruined lives, and a man who could not stop gambling with consequences until consequences became the only thing left. John Joseph Gotti Jr. was born on October 27, 1940, in the Bronx, New York City. He was one of many children in a working-class Italian-American family that carried the weight of hard labor, tight money, and stricter expectations. His father, John Gotti Sr., worked as a laborer, and the household learned early that nothing came easy and nobody outside the family was going to save them. Like many boys in crowded neighborhoods, Gotti grew up absorbing two different educations at once. One education was the official one: school, rules, jobs, patience, waiting your turn. The other education was the street status, hustle, shortcuts, intimidation, and the idea that respect was something you took, not something you earned slowly. Gotti did not stay in school long enough to build a conventional path. He dropped out as a teenager, and the future that remained open to him was the future that was already surrounding him. In New York City in the 1950s and early 1960s, organized crime was not a rumor. It was an ecosystem, stitched into certain unions, certain clubs, certain businesses, and certain corners where young men learned which names mattered and which debts never truly went away. Gotti's family eventually moved to Brooklyn, and he spent formative years in areas where mafia influence was both visible and quietly enforced. The exact line between a tough kid and a kid on the payroll could be thin. A young man might start by running errands, guarding a door, delivering packages, or being the guy who shows up when someone needs to be scared. Then he learns that fear is a renewable resource, and that some people will pay for protection from the very violence that protection promises to prevent. By the time Gotti was in his 20s, he was building a reputation not as a steady earner with a cautious temperament, but as an aggressive operator who liked risk and wanted to be noticed. He was drawn toward the orbit of the Gambino crime family, one of the most powerful mafia families in the United States. In that world, the family was not a family in the sentimental sense. It was a hierarchy, a brand, and a system of rules designed to keep money flowing upward and trouble flowing downward. A young associate could earn by doing work for made men, but the associate also carried the danger because associates were expendable in a way made men were not supposed to be. Gotti's early criminal life included theft, hijacking, and the kind of street violence that built tourism in that environment. He was not famous yet, but he was learning the mechanics of reputation. He learned which kinds of aggression impressed older men and which kinds of impulsiveness created problems. He learned that charm could soften a room, and menace could harden it again whenever needed. And he learned that the police were not an abstract enemy, but a constant pressure, a tax on criminal life paid in arrests, court dates, bail, and time. Gotti began working closely with a crew connected to the Gambino family's influence in Brooklyn and Queens. Over time, he became associated with the crew led by Aniello Neil Delacroce, a feared and respected Gambino underboss figure who represented old-school discipline and street legitimacy. Delacroce was important to Gotti not only as a superior, but as a model. To many in that world, Delacroce embodied the tough guy's tough guy, someone who commanded fear without needing applause. Gotti, by contrast, always seemed to want the applause along with the fear. That difference would matter later. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Gotti's criminal involvement deepened, and so did his legal trouble. He was arrested multiple times as he moved through the ecosystem of theft and violence that surrounded organized crime's revenue streams. One of the pivotal early events in his life involved a kidnapping case that led to a significant prison sentence in the 1970s. In that era, prison was not just punishment. Prison could be networking, a credential, proof that you could do time and not fold. It could also be a school for bitterness and a laboratory for future alliances. Gotti served time and returned to the streets with more credibility among criminals and more attention from law enforcement. He also returned with the same essential appetite. He wanted to rise. As the 1970s turned into the 1980s, the Gambino family was led by Paul Castellano, a boss who represented a more business-oriented model of mafia leadership. Castellano emphasized white-collar rackets and large-scale profitability, and he was often described as preferring an executive style over the street corner image. This created tension within the family because many street guys measured legitimacy by violence, prison time, and visible dominance. They believed the boss should be a street boss, not a boardroom boss. Gotti was, by temperament, a street guy. He was also building a crew that made money through traditional rackets like loan sharking, illegal gambling, and hijacking. These rackets were lucrative, but they were also loud, risky, and highly visible to investigators. The more a crew relied on violence and intimidation, the more it created witnesses, enemies, and motives for people to cooperate with the government. Gotti's circle included men who would become infamous in their own right, and it also included men who would later become crucial to the government's case against him. By the early 1980s, Gotti was rising within the Gambino structure, but the structure itself was under stress. Law enforcement pressure on organized crime was increasing, especially through the use of federal statutes designed to target criminal enterprises rather than isolated crimes. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, commonly known as RICO, gave prosecutors a way to present a pattern of criminal behavior as a single enterprise case. For mafia leadership, that was dangerous because it threatened to connect bosses to street crimes through chains of authority and benefit. Inside the Gambino family, the political struggle between factions sharpened as personal ambitions collided with the risks of exposure. Gotti's faction was often described as loyal to Delacroce and skeptical of Castellano's style and priorities. The tension was not only about money, but about identity. To men like Gotti, the boss was supposed to look like power, sound like power, and punish disrespect instantly. To men like Castellano, the boss was supposed to protect the enterprise from unnecessary heat, minimize public spectacle, and maximize profit. Gotti wanted the crown, but even before he had it, he wanted to look like he was already wearing it. The key turning point came in December 1985. On December 16, 1985, Paul Castellano was assassinated outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. The killing was a shock in its boldness and its visibility, and it sent a clear message to everyone watching. The Gambino family was changing leadership by force. The assassination is one of the most notorious moments in American organized crime history, and it became inseparable from Gotti's rise. In the Mafia's own mythology, bosses were supposed to be replaced through internal consensus, not public spectacle. In reality, ambition has always had its own rules. After Castellano's death, Gotti quickly emerged as the dominant figure and became widely recognized as the new boss of the Gambino family. The move elevated him from a powerful captain to one of the most powerful criminals in the United States. It also made him the primary target for federal investigators because bosses were the prize. With the crown came a new kind of life. Gotti began operating from the Ravenite Social Club in Little Italy, a place that became both his headquarters and his stage. He cultivated an image that was unusually public for a mafia boss. He wore expensive suits, styled his hair carefully, and walked in ways that suggested he wanted the cameras to catch him at his best angle. Reporters began calling him the Dapper Don, a nickname that signaled how much of his legend was tied to performance. But performance is a double-edged weapon. The more you become a public character, the more you attract the kind of attention that does not fade. In the late 1980s, Gotti faced a series of criminal prosecutions. Several times, he was acquitted, and those acquittals amplified his myth. He began to be called the Teflon Don, implying that charges did not stick to him. To his admirers, the acquittals looked like proof of genius or invincibility. To prosecutors and investigators, they looked like proof that intimidation, manipulation, and corruption were still powerful forces around organized crime. In reality, the acquittals did not mean the government had stopped pursuing him. They meant the government needed a better strategy, better evidence, and, above all, someone inside the organization who would talk. Gotti's leadership style also began to reveal its weaknesses. He was charismatic, but he could be impulsive and vindictive. He demanded loyalty, but he also created fear among his own people because displeasing him could be fatal. This kind of leadership can feel strong in the short term because it produces compliance quickly. In the long term, it creates a specific danger. The people closest to you begin imagining life without you, and they begin calculating whether the government might be the safer bet. Gotti's inner circle included Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, who rose to become underboss. Gravano was an effective operator and a major earner, and he became one of Gotti's key pillars. But pillars crack when pressure increases. The FBI and other agencies were increasingly using surveillance, informants, and wiretaps to build enterprise cases. They focused on capturing leadership conversations, moments when bosses discuss disputes, money, violence, and the machinery of control. This is where Gotti's love of talk became a liability. A boss who rarely speaks about sensitive matters is harder to record. A boss who talks a lot, vents a lot, boasts a lot, and criticizes people around him creates evidence. The Ravenite Social Club became an obsession for investigators for precisely that reason. Over time, law enforcement succeeded in placing bugs that captured conversations and helped prosecutors map out the enterprise's internal logic. These recordings were crucial because they revealed how Gotti spoke privately, not just how he posed publicly. They captured moments of management, complaint, and calculation, and they helped demonstrate leadership involvement in criminal operations. Meanwhile, Gotti's reign was not stable. Within the Gambino family, there were resentments about how Castellano had been removed and about the risks of Gotti's publicity. Outside the family, other crime groups watched the Gambinos carefully because shifts at the top affected alliances and conflicts. Gotti's era also included internal violence and retaliation, including deadly disputes tied to power struggles and perceived betrayals. One particularly significant event during Gotti's early leadership period was the death of Frank DeCicco, a high-ranking Gambino figure who was killed by a car bomb in 1986. That kind of attack signaled that enemies were willing to strike in dramatic ways, and it reinforced the atmosphere of paranoia that comes with violent leadership transitions. Gotti's public persona often masked a private reality. A boss lives with constant suspicion. He has to worry about rivals, government bugs, informants, and even friends who might become liabilities. In that environment, loyalty is never purely emotional. It is transactional, reinforced by profit and fear. By the end of the 1980s, federal authorities were building a case designed not to graze Gotti, but to end him. They wanted a RICO prosecution that would connect him to the enterprise's criminal pattern. To do that, they needed insiders, recordings, and a narrative that a jury could understand. They also needed a turning point, because as long as Gotti's closest partners stayed silent, the wall would hold. The turning point came when pressure tightened around Gravano. Gravano faced serious legal jeopardy, and he also faced internal danger, because in Mafia culture, suspicion alone can be deadly. He began to believe that Gotti might sacrifice him to protect himself. He also heard, on recorded conversations, Gotti criticizing him and shifting blame toward him. That is the kind of betrayal that changes a man's calculus overnight. In 1991, Gravano agreed to cooperate with the government. This was an earthquake. An underboss flipping is not a minor crack in the wall. It is the wall collapsing from the inside, because the underboss knows structure, history, procedures, and secrets that outsiders cannot reliably infer. With Gravano's cooperation and the weight of surveillance evidence, prosecutors moved in with a case strong enough to survive intimidation and strong enough to tell a story of leadership responsibility. In 1992, John Gotti was convicted in federal court on multiple charges, including racketeering. The conviction represented the end of the Teflon era and the triumph of a strategy designed to turn the Mafia's internal hierarchy into its own evidence. Gotti was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The man who had ruled through fear and image was now controlled by a system that did not care about either. Prison stripped away the stage. It replaced tailored suits with uniforms, replaced social clubs with concrete routines, replaced public mystique with bureaucratic reality. Gotti's status still mattered within the criminal world, but his physical power was gone. He was moved through high-security environments designed to limit his ability to manage the organization from behind bars. Even as he served his sentence, the story continued around him. The Gambino family continued, but it had to adapt to the reality that one of its most famous bosses had been taken down by modern investigative techniques and insider cooperation. Gotti's family also remained in the public eye. His son, John Gotti, became involved in the criminal world and faced his own legal battles, which kept the Gotti name in headlines and reinforced how organized crime can become a multi-generational trap. In prison, Gotti's health deteriorated over time. He was diagnosed with cancer, and his condition worsened as the years passed. In the end, the story did not conclude with a dramatic final confrontation or a cinematic shootout. It ended the way many real criminal legends end, with illness, confinement, and the slow fading of a man who once depended on attention like oxygen. John Gotti died on June 10, 2002, while still in federal custody. His death closed a chapter that had fascinated the media and terrified many of the people who had lived under the shadow of his organization. But the deeper meaning of the chronology is not that Gotti was uniquely evil or uniquely glamorous. The meaning is that he was a man who treated power like a performance, and he lived long enough to discover that performance creates records, witnesses, and enemies. The street taught him that fear could buy silence. The modern justice system, armed with surveillance and cooperation agreements, proved that silence can be purchased in the other direction too. Gotti's story also reveals how myths are manufactured. The Dapper Don image did not emerge by accident. It was fed by the press, by public fascination, and by Gotti's own willingness to lean into the role. Some people wanted him to be a villain they could recognize, a gangster in a perfect suit, a character from a movie walking through real streets. That desire turned him into a cultural symbol, even as real violence and real corruption hid behind the symbolism. When the myth becomes loud enough, it can distract from the machinery underneath. It can distract from extortion disguised as protection. It can distract from businesses bent under pressure. It can distract from families living with threats they never chose. It can distract from the reality that organized crime is not romance. It is control. It is a private government enforced by fear. If you trace Gotti's timeline carefully, you see a pattern repeating. He advances through aggression. He consolidates power through intimidation. He protects the image through manipulation. He underestimates the long memory of investigators and the short patience of frightened allies. He wins public attention, then becomes trapped by it. He survives trials, then becomes complacent. He relies on loyalty, then creates the conditions that make loyalty impossible. Because loyalty in that world is not a moral virtue. It is a business arrangement backed by the threat of death. And when a business arrangement stops benefiting one side, the threatened side starts looking for the strongest protection available. In Gotti's era, that protection increasingly came from the government. That is why Gravano's decision mattered so much. It was not only betrayal of a boss. It was a signal that the Mafia's old system of enforcement was losing its monopoly on fear. The government could offer a different kind of fear, but also a different kind of deal. A deal that traded secrecy for survival. Gotti had mastered the art of creating fear in rooms where he held the leverage. But he could not master the fear that grows in a man who realizes his boss will blame him, sacrifice him, or kill him to save himself. That is the fear that flips an underboss. That is the fear that rewrites a criminal empire's future. If you want to understand why John Gotti became a global symbol, you have to hold two truths at once. He was genuinely powerful in his environment, and he was also genuinely reckless. He had charisma, and he also had vanity. He could inspire loyalty, and he could also provoke betrayal. He could command silence, and he could not stop talking. He loved the spotlight, and the spotlight eventually illuminated the evidence that buried him. And in the end, the chronology does what it always does. It strips away the nickname, the suit, the headlines, and the myth. It leaves a record of choices. A boy who left school and chose the street. A young man who chose risk because it offered faster status. An ambitious criminal who chose a throne and accepted the enemies that come with it. A boss who chose spectacle and built his own legend in front of cameras. A leader who chose control through fear and created the betrayals that fear inevitably produces. A prisoner who watched his empire continue without him, because empires built on intimidation never truly belong to one man. They belong to the system of intimidation itself. John Gotti did not invent that system. He simply became its most photogenic face. And when the system finally collapsed around him, the face went first. The suit became a memory. The social club became a crime scene in the historical record. The courtroom walks became footage replayed after the verdict instead of before it. And the name Gotti became a warning as much as a legend. That the performance of power can feel like power, until the moment the performance becomes the proof. If you want, I can continue this script in the same voice, expanding the timeline with more granular milestones, early arrests, key crew members, major trials, media moments, and the final RICO build-up, while staying documentary safe and TTS friendly.